Always a challenge. Okay. We're recording.
I may have a dog barking in the background occasionally.
That's okay. And actually, I should have told you this before I started the recording. In 30 minutes, I'm going to take a 1-second break, spin around in my chair, and put my kindergartner on virtual school because COVID. So, and we're doing this during the day, so there's also a 5th grader wandering around here. He may appear in the
Gotcha.
in our meeting at some point. They just kind of jump in and out. The kindergartner's outside playing right now, so he may come in at any minute too, just to warn you in advance. So I apologize in advance. This is working from home with elementary school kids in a pandemic.
Not alone in that.
Yeah. So let me introduce you real quick because we are recording this for the podcast. Your name is Jane Gorman. You have 6 mysteries on Amazon, which look amazing. Alex K. How do you say Alex's last name?
Kaminski.
Kaminski.
Adam Kaminski.
Adam. Oh crap. Adam Kaminski. I'm so sorry. I got the A. Yeah, and they look great. I totally grabbed book 1. Because I love mysteries so much. They're so fun.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so talk to me, why mysteries?
Because I love reading mysteries. I can't get enough of them. I mean, I am a binge reader. I was a binge reader before people were talking about binge reading. I don't know if people are even talking about binge reading yet. But
That's amazing. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up reading mysteries too. It was especially legal thrillers. I was a huge John Grisham nut.
I used to do a little bit more variety with the thrillers and the spy books, and but recently I've been doing more traditional mysteries. It's just what gets my interest. Especially, I find mystery to be very calming when things are a little bit in turmoil.
Yeah.
And then mystery and everything gets resolved in the end. I mean, yes, some people die.
Yeah, that's okay. They're not the heroes.
Guys get caught.
That's right. The crime is solved by the end of the book, and everything is pleasantly wrapped up. Exactly. Yeah. I like the puzzle of it. I love figuring out. I really love a good mystery that like drops me a ton of clues and then lets me sort through them one at a time.
Exactly. And you don't want it to be too easy, but you don't want it to be too hard. You don't want to feel like you were cheated. Like, wait a minute, we never knew that. I've read some mysteries where the detective will solve it with some piece of information that we, the reader, didn't have.
Yeah, it's like not fair. Or the suspect will show up in like chapter 25.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, that's clearly, if you had introduced this person in chapter 4, I would have known. Like, this isn't fair.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't stand that either. But yeah, so anyway, I love it. I think it's fun. So, and you sent me a piece from a new book.
Yeah.
And the new detective is Anna?
Yeah.
All right, so talk to me a little bit about what we're looking at.
So it's a new series. Anna McGregor is she runs a B&B in Cape May, New Jersey, which is this little town on the beach, a little Victorian town, these beautiful sort of gingerbread houses, if you can picture the type, with the gables and peaks. She did not intend to run a B&B in Cape May. She was almost done getting her doctorate in medical anthropology when 2 things happened simultaneously. Her great aunt died and left her a B&B, and she ran into some trouble in the academic world, which I go into in the book a little bit. She had some things she needed to step away from. So the timing was perfect. She thought, great, I'll just take a break from academics, take a break from my research, go down, run this B&B. And then, of course, wouldn't you know, her very first guest dies at the breakfast table.
Nice. That's my kind of mystery. Very Murder, She Wrote. Very much like, I'm on vacation in this town.
Exactly. It is very much a cozy mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I love the whole setup. That's fantastic. And I love that you gave her expertise. Like, you know, the detective always has to have some kind of into the, like, you know, medical crime police world. So that's a nice you've got a nice the medical anthropology is a nice step in there. That's great.
I started with her as more of a I started with her being more of like pre-med or as a doctor, but the problem is, or actually I had her a chemist at one point. The problem is I was going to have to do an awful lot of research to learn about chemistry. And I'm actually, I'm like, that's just, you know, I can't fake being a chemistry PhD. I can be an anthropology PhD because I actually have a PhD in anthropology.
So that's awesome.
Do that, yes.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many of my ideas have died on the table because I've been like, I don't want to research that.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that.
Am I going to spend the next 2 years learning chemistry, or am I going to pull on resources I already know, friends who are in medical anthropology?
Yeah. That's awesome. I love it. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to do with your piece today as we talk through it. I want to talk about all the great things you're doing because there's a lot of really fantastic stuff in the piece. And this is chapter 8 from the book. So just a heads up as we talk. I love getting a chapter and like being dropped into the world of characters. My perception of the characters are based on this one chapter. So it may be that like the rest of the book is communicating something else, and my perception in this chapter is off. So just to put that out there up front, that like take what I'm saying today about the characters with a grain of salt, because there's I'm not seeing the whole work.
Based on the notes you sent me, you seem right on. So.
Oh, great. Oh, well, that's always nice. So I want to talk about the great things you're doing. I want to look at your character voices and talk about them. I want to talk about keeping the reader engaged through dialogue scenes like this, and just some little tweaks we can make. Like your dialogue is super realistic and very engaging, and I love that. And there's just some little like tweaks we can do to like up that reader engagement in the scene. And then I want to talk about large group scenes and time and how that works in the piece. Because there's some moments in the piece where I was like, okay, like we need to think about the whole room and what's happening in time in the room, as opposed to this character's really great action that you wrote. Was there anything else that stood out to you before I jump into those things that you really wanted to talk about?
Well, the thing that stood out most to me, and I think you may have captured that what you're saying, is making the changes that you made, or that you suggested, were making the two characters anyway, Anna and Evan, really play off against each other.
Nice.
Like I think you used the word spar. I'm like, yes, that's perfect, because I hadn't thought about it that way.
Great, that's cool. So we'll definitely get there. First, I want to talk about this stuff you're doing that I love, because I want you to do much more of it. So page 1. This opening you have, so the scene opens with, I'm not sharing my screen yet, so I'm the only person that can see what I'm talking about. Sorry, let me share my screen. Oh man, I'm on like, I've done probably 30 of these sessions now, and I still can't quite seem to figure out how to work my tech. And I'm just using a simple Zoom meeting. It's nonsense. So I love this. Anna's cleaning her house because they've come in and they've ransacked it looking for clues for the murder. And she's surprised by the patrolman Burley, Evan Burley, who interrupts her cleaning. And you did this thing up front that I really love, which is this stumbling. So let me get rid of my notes here for a second. You have this, patrolman Burley, hi, good morning, I'm Just. And this is such a great, fantastic way to communicate that surprise without saying like she was surprised, because what you don't do here is go, Anna was surprised to see Professor Burley walking into her house, which is I think what a lot of us do. Just, it's easy, it's smooth, but instead you're using her kind of stumbling in the dialogue to create that sense of nervousness. I really loved it, and all I did here was take it to the next, like take it a little bit further. And just add in the middle of it a kind of like, just to put it in there. So I loved, and you did that throughout the piece. You have moments throughout the piece where you're really communicating well what the characters are feeling, just with straight dialogue. And it's really hard to do. So you're doing that really well, which I really liked. Sorry, I'm going to refer back to my notes. Oh, on page 4, you had a scene down here that made me just laugh out loud, and it's so great because it expresses, it's at bottom of 3, top of 4, it just expresses kind of their relationship, and I hope it's a repeated scene in the book.
It is.
Oh, that's so great. I love repeated scenes like this that can communicate. So when we find a great repeated scene that can like communicate characters' relationships and communicate how characters are feeling about each other, with just like a couple lines of dialogue, it's so fantastic. So you got this, her younger cousin, see, I can't say, is that Eowyn?
Owen.
Owen, thank you. Owen walks in, and she introduces him to Evan, the patrol officer, and she said, "Evan, this is my cousin, Owen. He's come to stay with me for the summer." Owen. Owen piped up particularly. Owen, Anna tried to say. Owen looked at the floor, shaking his head. That exchange is so great because it like communicates their relationship and their like struggle with each other, and it's just so fun. And never in here do you use the words. Anna was frustrated because she couldn't pronounce his name, right? Like it's all communicated in there, really great. So I really loved that, and I love that you are repeating it through the book. That makes me super happy. Yeah, I really like that. The other thing I loved is you have these really fantastic lines that are so great. Let me see if I can find the one I wanted to read. Um, Here we go. So part of what you're doing that I think is really good that I wish I did better, and I think all authors can work on, is you're taking these moments of physicality and you're using them as part of the dialogue so that like the nonverbals are continuing to communicate what's happening in the character's emotions. So like when we boil dialogue down to like what are we trying to do with it, right? Like what's the big deal about dialogue? If I was to drop it into like one big sentence, the big deal is communicating character emotions and interactions, right? Like we want to get behind the character's eyes through their dialogue, and that dialogue includes their nonverbals between each other, right? Like the like you said, the sparring, the back and forth between one another. And you've got these great moments. Like this was the one that I really loved. You said, and we need to find out who did it, Evan said, looking directly down at her. Anna gulped and looked down at the coffee pot still in her hands. She turned her back on Evan to replace it on the burner and realized her hands were shaking. She took a few breaths. So great, right? Like we get all of the like anxiety and stress and concern, and it is this wonderful transition into the piece to a conversation that becomes more of a interrogation than it does, and them interrogating each other, that like great like back and forth, um that's so fun in a mystery between suspect and culprit, or in this case fake suspect and police officer. Suspect and culprit, those are the same. Suspect and detective discovery. So really nice. This is a great intro into that, because in the tone of the piece we can feel her anxious about the state of her house at the beginning, and we can feel her anxious about Evan, who she clearly has feelings for, or is at least discovering feelings for. I don't know how developed they are at this point, but is at least discovering feelings for. And then here you've added these two sentences that are just this amazing transition that lets the reader know, hey, the tone is about to change. Right? Like Anna is changing, the tone is about to change, voices are going to change, right? Like things, we're moving into a new section here. And it's really great. And then that scene that I read with Eoin, which I know I just screwed that name up again. I need him behind me to tell me how to say it. He changes the scene again because he interrupts this like detective back and forth. So anyway, I loved how you're using those nonverbals to transition tone for the characters. It's really, really great. Yeah. So let's talk about the character voices. Talk to me about who Anna is.
She is generally a confident, smart, curious woman who has been thrown for a loop in her life and is feeling like the rug's been pulled out from under her. So everywhere where she felt so secure and confident and knowledgeable before, now she's sort of finding a new path, and she's a little uncertain about that.
Gotcha. There were these moments in her voice where I would describe her as a little naive.
Okay.
And they happen mostly in the nonverbals. Her voice is what I would say you're describing. She's confident. She's clearly very intelligent. At the same time, she's not aggressive, right? Like she's very self-controlled. So there's several times in the piece where Evan contradicts her or kind of comes after her a little bit or dismisses her, and she never fights back. She always kind of pulls herself in, which is really fantastic character voice if it's intentional.
Right.
Then there are these moments here where like Evan is able to charm her and she has immediate responses. So in essence, he pulls her out of character. My question is like, is that intentional? So like the confident, strong woman you're describing can go two directions. So let me read the preface to the scene. It says, she says, why do you trust me? Implying that you don't really know me, which is a really great, like strong thing to challenge this detective on. Like, why are you trusting me with this? Like, you have no idea who I am. And he's pushing back and he says, I knew your Aunt Louise. I know other people in town. I'm a good judge of character. You have an honest face. Right. And the commenting on her face, Anna says, Anna felt herself grinning stupidly and wiped the smile off of her face. So my question is like, there's two ways to go with a character like Anna. She's either strong, confident, and empowered, and she's not going to be swayed by something like that, right? Like she might feel butterflies and like get upset about it, but Anna in the piece is very controlled in what's going on. Like even when she's surprised at the beginning, she recovers pretty quickly to get into this conversation about suspect. The other way to go with an Anna type character is that the truth of her core, like the core of her personality, is that she really does want to be this kind of optimistic, enjoying the people around her, seeing the world with no trouble, and is having to put on the strong mask because of what's happening. So I guess my question is, in that kind of tension, where do you feel Anna falling more?
So one of the things that I'm trying to do in this book is that there are two male figures, Evan the cop, and then this handyman. And Anna is a different person with each man. So whereas Evan makes her want to be strong, with Evan, she wants to be this strong woman who's all her own. But with the other guy, with Luke, she feels like she can really be more herself. She can burst out in tears and, cry on his shoulder.
Okay. So let's talk about that for a second. So what you're saying is that, I'm just going to say back to you what you said, what I heard you say. Anna's voice needs to modulate or change based on which guy she's with.
Right.
So the question is, what's her core? Where's she modulating from? Right? Like, because if you got Luke over here and you've got Evan over here, and over here she's strong and tough with Evan, and over here she's vulnerable with Luke, what's happening when a character modulates their voice is not that they're becoming a different voice, it's that they have a core, and parts of that core are being suppressed and parts of that core are being expressed. Right?
I think her core is the strength. The core is a strong woman, but because of these difficulties she's faced recently, she's been sort of like unsettled.
Gotcha.
She's been pulled away from it, and she needs to get back to it.
So my recommendation is that when she is with Evan, you don't let her be swayed like this in her physical reactions, because we want that like strength expressed. To get this kind of reaction out of her, he's really going to have to work for it. Right. Whereas with Luke, if you have this strength and at the same time vulnerability, so like strength, a strong person who has, when they come into intimate settings, can let their guard down. The vulnerability needs to look less flirtatious and needs to look more accepting. of what someone else has to offer, or more open and sharing, right, of who she is. So the way you can express that is, to Luke, she's going to blurt out things that she wouldn't normally say.
Yeah.
Right? Like, she's just going to say, like, I'm just so frustrated. And then you can give her a moment where she kind of catches herself in surprise. Like, did I say that? Right? Like, or she's going to complain to Luke about things happening in the world. You wouldn't believe it. Evan was at my house and he didn't even help me clean up. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be sharing that with you. Right. Like, so you want her with Luke blurting things out and then immediately backtracking, like realizing, oh crap, I've dropped my mask and I need to get it back on real quick. Right. Like, so that would be my recommendation, is taking, so with these scenes with Evan, you've got a couple of them in here. This one where sorry, I'm racing ahead of myself. You got a couple of them in here where she's physically expressing this vulnerability, where she's like demonstrating her inner desires to him, and she can't do that to keep her voice consistent. I mean, she can. She's your character, but that would be
no, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, pull it back. Now, in contrast, you have this really great moment here where he comes in the house, and you wrote, the deep brown of his eyes reminded her of a Scottish hero she'd been reading about yesterday. It would be nice, and then you had to have a strong romantic hero around to rely on, not to have to go chasing around a dark horse in the middle of the night with a field hockey stick. She remembered the kind words of Felicia about Evan and let herself daydream just a little. So my feeling is that this kind of inner thought is okay for her. She can keep it inside. She just can't she's not going to be comfortable expressing it to Evan.
Right.
But this kind of inner thought is what she'll express to Luke. You see this in romantic comedies all the time, especially in the movies, but in books too, where like the strong, tough character, typically involving alcohol, will let their guard down and suddenly say things to somebody that they never would have said otherwise.
Right.
So that's kind of, you don't need alcohol to bring it out with Luke. You just need Luke's charm, but she's going to like let that guard down. So I love that character, and I hope that helps as you work through the chapters, kind of building her voice out a little bit.
That helps a lot.
Talk to me about Evan, and let's talk about Evan's voice. How do you want Evan to come off?
So he's still relatively young for a police officer. He's a patrolman. He's working on this case with the detective. He's not in charge of the case. He's just, one of the patrolmen working with the detective. He wants to do a good job. For him, this is about career advancement. Like, he wants to do a good job, but he's a really good, kind, giving man. He's just a truly good person. He's known throughout the town as just being the sort of guy who helps people in his spare time, like.
So interesting choice here. The good, kind, giving helper with the professional demeanor. Right, like, which is a great, like, a really wonderful kind of base set to build a voice off of. I'm going to ask you about some choices you made in the chapter. Why doesn't he help her clean up?
That is a great question. Well, let's see. I'm Evan. I don't want to, I've already interfered with her house enough, searching. I don't want to insert myself any more than I already have. I don't get the feeling that she wants my help, and I just want to respect her space and let her handle it.
Gotcha. I would just encourage you. I didn't get that communication from the piece. The communication I got from the piece was, I'm so busy doing my police work and telling you you're a suspect that I don't actually care that you're cleaning up this house.
Wow. Okay.
And I don't care that we wrecked it.
Wow.
Right? Like, so he needs more apology.
Yep.
He needs to apologize for what happened.
Yep. Okay.
He needs to apologize immediately when he walks in the door.
Gotcha.
Right? Like this, Good morning. I thought I might find you here. Oh, Patrolman Burley. Hi. Good morning. I'm not sure. Instead, I added this sentence here. Seems like you've got quite a mess here because I wanted the interchange between them. I would change that and make it something like, I can't believe we left it like this. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like, and then immediately we get the sense that like, oh, he cares.
Right.
Right. I'd also later in the piece, you have him sitting down and her going to get him coffee.
Yeah.
Flip that.
Let him get her coffee?
Let her get him coffee. If you like, so, because part of when I read the chapter, part of what I struggled with was like, why does she like this guy? He's kind of a jerk. So like maybe she's got to think for bad boys that treat her terribly, but that's not the Anna you're describing. The Anna you're describing is very strong, and it's gonna have to be wooed, right? Like she's not just gonna like, follow some dude because he's got long eyelashes that he flashes at her every once in a while.
Right.
She's gonna have to be won over by this guy, especially in comparison to the super charming Luke, right? Like Evan's got a fight on his hands. He's got to like actually earn it. So often in their give and take, he is defensive and he cuts her off a lot.
Huh.
And so I wouldn't have him doing that. I'm looking for a good example. I added that, so we're not going to look at that example. Let me get rid of my gobbledygook. Here we go. So here, Anna slid into the stool next to Evan. Murder. That can't be common in a Cape May thing. It's not. Detective Walsh is running the investigation now, but it won't be long before he attracts some attention from the higher ups, so we need to get the truth fast. Walsh will have some experience of this sort of thing, so, and then he pauses, he toyed with his mug, and Anna realized there was more. The worst is yet to come. So we have to consider the possibility that you may have been responsible. Right? Like, that's a very direct accusation for someone who is kind and compassionate to her. So like he needs to assure her here that she's going to be okay.
Right.
He needs to like tell her like, I know you're going to be fine. It's not a big deal. Well, he may not say it's not a big deal, but like, don't worry. We're going to do the whole investigation. Like we need some stuff here where he is concerned about her feelings and how things are going. Okay. I'm so sorry I have to do this. Give me 30 seconds. I'm going to spin around and get my... Okay, I'm back from putting my kid into digital PE. Weirdest thing in the world. All right. Well, maybe not the weirdest thing in the world, but weirdest thing in my house this morning. Okay, so we were talking about Evan. So, yeah, I would encourage giving him more concern for her. And then when you get to this place where he's really coming at her in page 3, not coming at her, but sparring with her, this is where you can take the concern away. So we talked about the transition you have for Anna, where she's kind of like nervous and anxious and frustrated that she has to clean. And then the tension rises as she realizes she's a suspect. And then it lowers again when her nephew comes in because she goes back to like thinking about, we want Evan to model that and move with her. So he needs to be kind and compassionate and concerned for her, getting her coffee, taking care of her, asking her about the mess. Now they're going to talk about being a suspect, and he's going to, that processional side of him is going to come in. And then when her nephew comes back in, he's going to go back to being kind and considerate, like kneeling beside her nephew and talking to him, right? Like, so we want them traveling together and in sync. And that, it's this weird thing, but that in syncness between their voices in chapters like this will communicate to the reader, not consciously, but on a subconscious level, like, oh, they're moving together. So even though they're fighting, they're still moving together.
I like that.
Whereas like if you have a romantic lead that's a fake, right? Like the in the triangle, the side that you're going to lop off at some point. You want them moving apart from Anna. So she becomes more frustrated and they become more relaxed. Right. And the reader will feel it and they'll be like, oh, they're out of sync, right? Like they're not matching up. She's more anxious and he doesn't notice. right? Like she's getting stressed and he doesn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you can do that with the dialogue, the more you'll subconsciously communicate to the reader, this is the love interest that I want her to land with.
Yep.
And then at the end of the book, when she chooses him, the reader will be like, yay! Right? Like, so, which is what we want, is the reader having the same. And, you know, speaking of mysteries, the mystery behind your love triangle, one way to throw the reader off, and this is getting like hyper technical with your dialogue, but one way to throw the reader off is to keep both love interests in sync with her until the middle of the book. And then suddenly one of them starts to slip out of sync. And that creates a nice, like, the reader going like, I like both of these guys. And then mid-book going like, but that one, we just had a moment. Right. Like I just watched, my wife and I just watched this Netflix special called Holiday, which is not great. One of the reasons it's not great is because the two characters are constantly out of sync with each other.
Huh.
They never actually line up. And then in the end, I didn't actually care that they got together. I was like, I don't care. They're totally out of sync through the whole movie. And and then all of a sudden, one of them makes kind of a concession to like, I will forgive everything you've done and be in sync with you now. Mm-hmm. But it comes too late. By the time it comes, it's like, I don't care about any of this.
Right.
So yeah, so it's getting that like subconscious syncing with your characters' voices, specifically what your characters are feeling and how the stress of their voices are escalating. That's that'll really help you build this love interest that readers will celebrate when it comes around.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about with Evan and Anna and Luke?
No. I like. I mean, that's a way of approaching their interactions that just hadn't occurred to me. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it's helpful. So the next thing I want to talk about is the 3-person scene.
Okay.
And considering time. So you have this moment here. Eowyn's, did I say that right?
It's just Owen.
Owen, dang it. See, I'm the worst. Owen's smile split his face, and he pulled his worn notebook and started scribbling in it. He made his way to the table without looking up from his book and hopped onto a chair while still writing. After a few seconds, he put his notebook on the table, folded his hands, and looked at Anna. So, like, what are Evan and Anna doing? That's like a 4-second moment. And I don't know if you've ever sat in silence for 4 seconds, but it can feel like an eternity.
Absolutely.
Like, what are they? They're just, you know, as he like moves through the space. And this is a hard thing when we write, like what I like to call big cast scenes, which is 3 or more people in a room. We have to kind of keep all of the plates spinning at one time. So just busting that out, like editing it out so that we have these, I wrote it over here in the comments, so that we have these moments of like, he does one thing, like Ewan smile split his face, he pulled out his notebook and started scribbling it. Now give Evan an action, right? Like Evan stood from kneeling to look down at what he was writing, right? Ewan stood up and made his way to the table, started writing. You know, Anna does blank thing in the kitchen. Like Anna picks this up and puts it in the trash can. You know, maybe even put this line in here. You probably want something to eat. She turned the cupboards. Let's see. What do you like? Pancakes, muffins? After a few seconds, he put the notebook on the table, folded his hands, and looked at Anna. Right? Like, so now we have this, like, his nonverbals are actually part of the dialogue that's going on, and Evan's nonverbals become part of the dialogue, and Anna's, like, it starts to be included, but we want to keep all of those plates spinning during these 4 seconds. So you got to like just space in some actions there for them. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And as soon as you pointed it out, I was like, how did I not notice that? Yeah.
Yeah. I find in mysteries, this is hardest. Like, so if Anna and Evan are ever doing an interrogation together,
Mm-hmm.
This is where this becomes really tough, because my instinct in a mystery is to like get like my two detectives right now are Mo and Stacy, and I really like it when one of them is asking questions,
Mm-hmm.
but I forget that the other one is there.
Right.
And in my writing, and I almost always in an interrogation scene have to go back and give some of the lines to the other one, so that my reader's not like, oh, actually my editor pointed this out to me first. My editor Laura was reading the first book, and she's like, whenever they go to an interrogation scene, Stacy like goes and sits in the corner and doesn't say anything anymore. And she was like, and that's not Stacy's personality, right? Like Stacy is a energetic extrovert who like loves being the center of attention. So this idea that like she's going to stop talking and go sit in the corner isn't, and that's in my head, that's not what was happening, but I wasn't communicating to the reader like, oh, she's still participating. This is where movies and TV have a huge advantage over us in books, because
it's doing something.
Yeah, the third character. I heard Brad Pitt give an interview once about how he always is eating in a scene because he doesn't know what else to do with his hands. So like, but it's great because George Clooney in like Ocean's 11 could be having a monologue and Brad Pitt's just back there eating French fries, and the movie director doesn't have to communicate like we do that, like, you know, Brad stepped to the back and took out his French fries and started popping. Like, you know, so, but we just have to be aware that like when we get these big cast scenes, which are so great and like so wonderful in mysteries, that like we need to keep all of the characters moving. We need to be communicating, like, and we can't forget any of the characters in that conversation.
Yeah, I definitely have a few other group scenes I'm gonna need to go back through now and look at.
Yeah, and it's not like a cheat I'll do. Like if you wanna cheat, especially if there's like a lot of back and forth talking, I'll take a color in Word and I'll highlight each character a color. It takes like for a 5-page scene like this, it takes like 10 minutes. And you just highlight each character their own color, and then you can visually see it. You're like, oh, there's a lot of green here, but there's almost no red, right? Like, so like giving that like, you know, feel that that visual aid is super helpful.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so we talked about group scenes, we talked about characters, keeping the reader engaged in dialogue sections. This is just a little cheat. Again, your dialogue's fantastic. So this is something that's very common for us as writers. And so I always try to, like, this is a cheat that we can pull out. One, always making sure there's a back and forth, especially when you have two characters. So like we were talking about that like spar where they're like trading blows, or in a conversation like this, I like to think of it more as a dance where one's leading and another's following, right? But that they're moving together. So here, for example, you have a line from Evan, you have a line from Anna, and then in the original, you moved right back into another line from Anna, and then you moved into a description of Anna, and then you came back to Evan speaking. Is it Evan here? No, this is Anna again. And then Evan doesn't actually come back until down here. So we want this, like, we want to give them like the push and pull, right? Like, so line from Anna, line from Evan.
Right.
Line from Anna, thought from Anna, right? Response from Evan. Thought line from Anna, response from Evan, so that they're like passing, or you can think of it as like a game of hot potato where they're like throwing the hot potato back and forth, so that they're giving it to the other person all the time, passing the other person the like conversational ball. That giving them that back and forth keeps the reader engaged, because it honestly, it forces you to add more dialogue into the scene. So like that's really all it does. It forces you to put more voice in the scene so that the reader stays engaged in the scene. Because if we think about like, if you think about dialogue as zooming in, and then inner thoughts and descriptions of plot points and prose as zooming out, right? We want to keep the reader zoomed in to the trees, and what we don't want is to go in, come out, go in, come out, go in, come out, right? Like we want to stay in. So forcing yourself to write that back and forth keeps you in, and then brings you out for a second, and then keeps you back in as they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then brings you out for a second. So we want to keep that like zoomed in for the reader into the dialogue, that keeps them focused and going. Yeah, when a writer who does this really, really well, while giving a massive amount of plot information, is Toni Morrison. In her book Beloved, she has these flashback scenes where she's like telling a story of something that happened 13 years ago. And as you read it, it feels like the scene should be like omniscient narrator. But instead, what she does is she has two of her main characters, Denver and Sethi, and she'll have Denver say, hey, what happened that one time? And then Sethi will tell the story. And it's in Sethi's voice, and it's like she's got like a whole paragraph of just explaining the story. And what it does as a reader is, instead of pulling me out to hear this history of what happened, it keeps me right here in the conversation. And every once in a while, Denver will interject, and it keeps me right here. There's even a scene where Sethi's telling about Denver's birth, and it's a story Denver knows. And so Morrison has Denver throw in details she wants to hear. Mm-hmm. And there's this long, like multiple page story that keeps us like zoomed in right here the whole time. So anyway, putting that back and forth in can do that. So things that interrupt the zoom, that make the reader like pull out of it, so top of page 3, using phrases like this in the middle of a sentence when you don't have to.
Phrases like what?
Anna said.
Oh.
Right, like I know there's only 2 people in the room. Mm-hmm. I know who's saying it. Right, like I don't need to know. And I could hear it in her voice. Like her voice sounds different than Evan's voice. So Evan raised his hand in a gesture that's probably meant, Anna raised his hand in what was probably meant to be a comedy. Evan raised his hand in what was probably meant to be a comedy gesture. This is going to be the craziest podcast ever because my kid is behind me. And then he says, not on purpose, I'm sure, but we don't yet know what killed him. We need to consider all of our options, right? Like, this is all one string of dialogue. It's great. I'm super zoomed in. I get his physical motion, and then I get his full phrase of like, I see, Anna said, so I'm a suspect in a murder investigation? Like, of course she said, I see, so I'm a suspect in a murder investigation, right? Like, so we don't need the pause. Like, just keep us fully engaged. Like, don't give us a second to be like, whew, what happened? Okay, I'm going back in. Keep us pulled out. Or there was another one, a different one on page 1. Here you have this thought, this remembrance of what she had heard about Evan before, mm-hmm. right? That's a moment where I'm in here, and now you're pulling me out as like an abstract thought, and then I have to go back in, right? Mm-hmm. So you have the deep brown eyes, the deep brown of his eyes reminded her of a Scottish hero. This is a good line, so I'm going to read it again. The deep brown eyes reminded her of a Scottish hero she'd been reading about yesterday. It would be nice I took out to have a strong romantic hero around to rely on, just because you don't need those words. It would be nice not to have to go chasing around the dark in the middle of the night hockey stick. So I've started to pull out. I'm still focused on the moment because we're talking about how she feels right now, but I'm starting to pull out a little bit. And then now you pull me out all the way. She remembered the kind words Felicia had about Evan and let herself daydream just a bit. So now I was in this, and I'm thinking about how she's thinking of him. Now I'm remembering this conversation from Felicia, and I'm in a totally different conversation. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, and then she remembers why she was here, and she frowned. Why did you tear my kitchen apart like this? Now I'm back. Right? Like, so don't pull me out. Like, keep me in the whole time, because we don't, and if you want to have this moment where she remembers Felicia, put it in the dialogue. Right? Like, so
oh, yeah.
Why did this is just me assuming what that conversation was about, but like, the middle of the night with a field hockey stick, this is going to take forever. He said, why'd you tear my kitchen apart like this? It wasn't just me, he said kindly. We had a team going through the White Horse. I remember Felicia said you like to say kind things to women to make them come on, right? Like
right.
whatever Felicia said, just put it in her mouth and put it into the dialogue. And like that keeps us in the scene and doesn't pull us out to have these like step away moments. Does that make sense?
Right.
And you'll notice as I'm reading this, I'm even taking out more words. Right? Like I totally just pulled this. She frowned and remembered why she was here. Right? Like I don't need it. I just keep me right in the dialogue, as much of the dialogue as possible, to keep that like deep engagement in what's going on. Yeah. All right. Oh, that was all that I had.
That was a lot.
Well, great. Well, you have a great piece. It's easy to talk about good writing. It's fun.
But it's really fun to think about it this way, you know, to yeah, it's a completely different perspective. I was so focused. I use my scenes to move the plot forward, to teach a reader something about the character. You understand the character better, but to see that interaction between them is just.
Yeah. So, you know, I was reading this one academic paper that had this fantastic line in it, which is every human interaction can be summed up into a series of conversations.
Huh.
And that's true of your characters as well, right?
Yeah.
Like every relationship Anna has is going to be summed up by a series of conversations in your books. And so like using those conversations like this one with Evan, it very intentionally to show whether or not they're in sync or out of sync, to let Evan demonstrate who you want him to be through conversation with Anna, right? Like, and in that word conversation, I'm including all the nonverbals, right? Like him getting her coffee instead of her getting him. Right? Like him interrupting her, but when he does, apologizing immediately. Right? Like to show that he's like aware of her feelings and what's going on with her and how she's feeling. All those kinds of things, like using these scenes. And then later when you write Luke, like just assuming that Luke is not a viable love interest, but like is like a fake, which he may not be at all, but just to play off of that stereotype, like having her stressed and trying to confide in him and having him not picking up on the fact that she's stressed and getting them out of sync in a conversation communicates to our reader like, hey, he's handsome and he's charming, but he's not going to make her coffee like Evan's going to make her coffee. Right. Like, so yeah, anyway. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording for a second and then we can chat a little bit more. Thanks for letting me do this. I really appreciate it.
That's not a problem.